Hey everybody, it's Steve here from the WellnessWarrior.coach. Today we are going to talk about, this is our second episode, we're going to talk about law number 1. Last week we talked about the 10 Primal Blueprint Laws, and we're going to break each one of those 10 blueprint laws down over the next however long it takes us. But today we're going to talk about law number 1, which is eat animals. Actually, it's eat plants and animals, but today we're just going to talk about the animal parts of that. As I put on the screen, there's a catch. So when we eat plants and animals, there's a whole wide variety of different types of plants and animals that you can get. In modern times, everything has a label on it too, and we'll talk about labeling in a second. And I just wanted to declassify or decode what all these labels are, and to give you a better education on what these labels are actually telling us and what do they actually mean. Some of them might sound like they're very grandiose and awesome, and we should buy those things, but that's not necessarily always the case. So as we go through, you'll see some of these labels. I tried to break it down so it goes from, not so good to the best type of labeling that you can get. And we're going to talk about 2 different types of labeling today. The first thing that we're going to look at as far as labels goes is beef and how that's labeled. And then the second thing that we'll go over today is chicken and poultry labeling. So I want you to be clear about what all of those things are. So when you go to the store, you can say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to get when I buy this. This is what I'm going to get when I buy this. All right. So remember, I am a level 2 primal health coach. This is for educational and informational and coaching purposes only. We won't do any coaching here today, but we will give you a lot of information to help you, make informed decisions. I'm obviously not a doctor, so this is not a substitute for medical advice. Anything I have out there is not for that. I never recommend you, switching off of any medication, based on what you hear on educational programming. So I would be more than happy to talk to you about some of those things as far as your medicine goes, but this is not the platform to do that today. All right, so going back from yesterday or last week, Primal Blueprint Law number 1 is eat lots of plants and animals. All right, so, and like I said, we're going to talk about the animals today. So think about, are all of those things that, you go to buy when we're talking about beef and chicken, are they all created equally? Are there any risks involved? Why should you even care about any of these things? What if you have a special heart for animals? Is there labeling out there that really deals with any of that? What if you really care about the environment? How should you eat beef and chicken, or pick your beef and chicken based on what you care about, whether that's the how the animals are treated, how they're grown, and their impact on the environment. So these are all things that I really think about when I'm going to buy chicken and beef. All right, so this is what the American Meat Association requires, or says that the government requires on labeling. All right, it requires them to put the product name on. All right, so here's the product name: beef sirloin steak. Okay, that checks out. An inspection legend. So this is U.S. inspected and passed by the Department of Agriculture. Check. The address line. So here we go. Pittsburgher, Highland, Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania. The safe handling statement. So here's the safe handling instructions. This is right out of my freezer. I just plucked it out, took a picture of it, and brought it to the screen. The net weight or quantity. So here's that, 1.33. The nutritional facts label. I did not find that on there. That is not on there. And then the ingredients. So this only has one ingredient, beef sirloin steak. So that covers that. All right, so that's what you should always find on any meat that you buy. All right, so if we're talking about labeling for beef, this gets super confusing because there's information that says there's no hormones, no antibiotics, it's natural or all natural. Some of it's pasture raised, some of it says certified organics, some of it says certified humane, grass fed, hand fed, troll fed, whatever it says on there. And some of them say non-GMO. So I want you to know what those all really mean because it can be very confusing. There's some of the labels down at the bottom that you might find. All right, so let's go a little bit deeper into those. So no hormones, no antibiotics. So I'm sure you've probably seen those on packaging before. This is pretty much very similar in poultry and beef. So I'm not going to cover this again when we're talking about chicken and turkey and poultry. But what does this mean? This one's pretty obvious. They're not giving their animals any hormones and no antibiotics. Now, it doesn't say anything else about, other drugs or what they feed their animals or anything else. This is just no hormones, no antibiotics. So they can give them drugs, they can give them a myriad of other things. But that's just what that one particular label is. So if you see that, I wouldn't be too crazy about just getting some, meat that just has no hormones or no antibiotics. All right, the second one, this one really cracks me up because as I've learned about natural and all natural over time, this really doesn't mean anything. For the USDA, that just means it's minimally processed. So of course a cow is natural, it's an animal, right? This hamburger from Ballpark, of course it's all natural because it was hopefully from a cow. I guess we can't be 100% sure about that, but that's all natural means. All right, you're all natural, I'm all natural. A rat running down the street, that's all natural too, but we're not going to bag some of those things up and sell those and put all natural tag on it. People are going to buy it. Yeah, maybe some people would buy that, who knows? But just know that natural and all natural, that really doesn't mean anything. All right, pasture raised. So that's the next thing that you can get when you're thinking about buying beef. All right. So again, this is one of those things where the USDA does not really have a definition for pasture raised. It could mean that they're, in a pasture for 5 minutes of their life. It could mean that they're in pasture their whole life. It could mean, they could look at a pasture, or the gate is open for them to walk out to the pasture if they wanted to, but if they didn't want to, they don't have to. So pasture raised, as far as beef goes, also really doesn't say anything as far as what the product is. All right, so the next thing on the list is certified organic. So slowly we're getting a little bit higher here. So what does certified organic actually mean? that just means that all the feed that the cattle was given was organic. All right. That an additional thing that is required is that they're not given any growth hormones. The farmer is only required to keep the records of what the cows eat, nothing else. And these animals could still be on a feedlot. So just because it says organic doesn't mean it was raised, in a pasture with some sun and they were happy little cows. It just means that they were basically fed an organic diet and not given growth hormones. So, USDA organic is better than all the other ones that we just talked about, but it could mean it's really good, or it could mean it's just a little bit better than all those other things. All right, another thing that people that are really concerned about the welfare of the animals is to get the little insignia on there that says certified humane. You can see I've added a couple other ones. So American Humane Certified, animal welfare approved. So according to the government, this could mean that they are outside for 4 hours of exercise a day. Actually, it doesn't mean that they're outside. It just means they can get 4 hours worth of exercise. They can still be kept indoors. There's no regulation on feed unless it says organic with it. And if your only concern is just making sure the animals are not mistreated, then just look for this symbol. A lot of times these are piggybacked on other symbols too. So generally when you start getting better and better quality things, they have more labels on them. So look for combinations, and sometimes it's based on the grower's opinion whether they actually raise these animals humanely or not. So you'd like to think that if they're going to go through the effort of getting certified humane label attached to their product, that they would actually be invested in the animals' welfare. So we can hope. All right, so grass-fed is the next one. So grass-fed really doesn't mean too much unless it has some of these other labels attached to it. What's the difference between grass-fed and grass-finished? Well, grass-fed means that they were pretty much given, grass, allowed to graze on grass, or given grass during the non-growing season, like hay and stuff like that. But that doesn't necessarily mean they were finished on grass. So grass finished means that they had grass all the way until the end. If it doesn't say grass finished, then they could be fattened up on grains right at the end of their lives. There's a bison farm about probably 2 hours east of here, and I talked to the farmer, and the farmer's daughter, I guess it was, or wife or whatever. And I asked about if they were grass-fed and finished, and she said, well, no, because the farmer didn't like how skinny the bison were when they took them to slaughter. So before he takes them to, get slaughtered to make into beef, or to make into, bison, whatever it makes, he fattens them up on grains. And I was like, oh my God, what the heck? It was so close. We would have bought a whole ton of stuff if it had not been fed grain the end of its life. It was very frustrating. But that is better than some of the other things that we saw before. All right, so the difference between grass-fed versus 100% grass-fed, that should be pretty obvious. So 100% grass-fed means it was pretty much fed grass its whole life. Grass-fed just means it had grass at some point. Maybe most of its life, maybe half its life, maybe couple days. So look for, a couple things when you're looking for grass-fed meat, and that is grass-fed and finished, or it's grass-fed or 100% grass-fed. So if it doesn't say organic, then they could have given the animal some, pesticide-laden grass, which you would hope that they wouldn't do that if they went through the whole effort to make it grass-fed, to, give it, grass that was treated with, Roundup, or, had synthetic fertilizer on it and whatnot. But, just if you see the organic sign with the grass-fed, which you generally do, then it's probably a lot better. All right. So here's a little graph that I found. I think it was on Pinterest somewhere. So, and it was referenced to a Butcher Box graphic. Butcher Box sells, grass-fed, grass-finished beef in a box, and it's mail order. So what's the difference between conventional beef that pretty much doesn't have any of those labels on and 100% grass-fed beef? Generally speaking, that those animals that are grass-fed were grown on a pasture. All right. If it's conventional, then chances are very likely that they were grown in a feedlot and fed grains their whole lives. So that is important. Important delineation, especially for me when I buy beef. Their diet, generally grass-fed beef is fed grasses, hay in the winter, call it silage sometimes, when it's too cold for them to get outside. Conventional cattle, they pretty much get whatever the farmer gives them. I've seen reports where, if there's a, stale candy, that the farmer gets on these conventional, well, usually a particular farmer is not farming conventional beef. Usually that's, a farmer that is getting their commands from big agriculture to make, conventional beef. But, I've seen pictures of, Skittles with the bags on them dropped into their troughs, and these animals eat the Skittles. There's no rules about, whether the feed has to be organic or not, so they can get, Roundup laden corn and tossed into there. I talked to a farmer in Murraysville that was she claimed to be, a regenerative farmer. And then I asked her what they fed their animals. And she was really proud to say that, they take, the leftover pastries from, one of the pastry shops in Latrobe and give them to the cattle to eat. Well, just like you and I don't think, we're designed to, scarf down pastries. And I've never seen a cow at Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts wolfing down some, pastries. So that was kind of a little bit off-putting too, that she was proud of it, but it really wasn't, doing the animals any favor. All right, and as far as nutrition goes, I think I touched on this with the diet as well, but mostly they eat grass if they're grass-fed, duh, right? And the ones that are in conventional, pretty much, like I said, just get whatever they get. Whatever's put in their trough, they're going to scarf down. And the last category that Butcher Box puts on here on this info graphic is about drugs. So in grass-fed beef, they're never given growth hormones or antibiotics. And I'm going to talk about the reason for that in a few minutes. But conventional beef, they can be full of antibiotics, and a lot of times they have to give those animals antibiotics because they're living in these deplorable conditions, you know, right next to each other, and all the movement they get is, you know, in a muddy yard, and if that, and they're jammed in there with a bunch of other cattle. So they, just like people, when they're in too close a proximity, they can pass on disease. Cattle can also pass on disease to each other too when they're in these deplorable conditions. All right. Oop. All right, so let me talk about this before we move on to poultry. The reason why cattle that are grass-fed do not generally need as much, or if any, antibiotics is because when they're out on the field, they're eating a very diverse diet. All right, they're maybe, you know, on some regenerative farms, there's, you know, hundreds of species of plants. So they're getting all their nutrients from all different types of plant species. Plants want to defend themselves. All right, they really don't want to be eaten. So what they will do is they are going to make like antioxidants or you know, defense mechanisms so they don't get eaten, especially when they get chewed down to the ground. Obviously, if they get mowed all the way down, they're not going to be able to survive as a species. So, and cattle that are going over big fields aren't going to spend their whole time on one place eating that great grass all the way to the ground. So grass-fed beef works, and cattle work more like an ecosystem than in conventional beef. So I can't remember the exact number, but I could be totally off on this one, but there might have been like 80 million bison in this country, you know, before the white people came over and decimated all of them. And they were able to survive. They didn't need antibiotics and drugs in order to survive. So that can happen now too. It totally can happen now. If we take our farming system and make it into more of a ecosystem, then everything's healthier. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I want you to see the difference between conventional and grass-fed. All right, so poultry labeling. We move on to chickens and the other birds that we eat, which is you know, not many, maybe turkeys. So these are the labeling things that are on there. A couple of them I'm not going to cover just because we did those with the beef. Natural pretty much means nothing. Obviously, chickens are natural. They're not made in a petri dish or whatever. So for the most part, so that kind of really doesn't mean anything. The other ones that we'll talk about is free range, 100% vegetarian diet, pesticide free, raised without antibiotics and antibiotic free, and raised without hormones, pastured, and organic. So these are some of the other ones, other labels that you might also find. The one on the bottom right is the most interesting one, which I'm not going to cover today because it'd probably take about 3 hours to cover. So this animal welfare certified comes in 5 different levels. So and the reason why I'm not covering it because I've never seen it before. If I ever see it and it starts becoming more commonplace, then I'll probably amend this presentation so we can talk about that a little bit more, but I've never seen it before. So it comes in 5 different levels, and obviously 5 is the best when they're taking care of the animals. And you know, 1 is a good stepping stone and a good start, but it's not as good as a 5, obviously. So let's go ahead and break those down. I put these in order. All right, so poultry with no certifications at all. All right, so these are usually in deplorable condition. If you can look at that picture that I posted, this is a factory chicken farm. In factory chicken farms, a lot of the birds can't even walk. They're so atrophied and so pumped full of chemicals, so their breasts get gigantic because most people just like the breast meat of the chicken rather than all the rest. So they really try to, accentuate that breast muscle so they can get the most out of it. So, they can pump them full of anything that they want to. Those, I'm sure you've seen those in the store where there's just no labeling in them. It just says like chicken thighs or chicken breasts or whatever, with absolutely no certifications. I did watch a PBS documentary on, these farms and how they, like Purdue Chicken, would shut down farmers if they exposed on what they were doing, to these chickens. So it's pretty ruthless. All right, free range poultry. So, and again, just like beef, you want to try to stack the things that it has. If it just says free range poultry, that's the next step up, and maybe the birds are able to, walk around a little bit, and you can see these ones have at least strong legs and are able to walk. But really, when it gets right down to it, free range just means they weren't raised in cages, and they were allowed to have at least 5 minutes of open air access a day. That doesn't mean they take advantage of that, but that's what that means to the USDA. That can mean that, they open the gate at the end of the chicken, structure. All right, so if it just says free range, it's probably, not too good. Although usually free range is like compiled with some other things. All right, so this is actually the next step up, is 100% vegetarian fed, but chickens aren't vegetarians. They pretty much eat and peck anything. They are actually really good for getting rid of ticks, because they'll eat all the ticks in the yard. All right. They want to eat bugs as well as maybe seeds that they find. I don't know what they peck for when they're pecking around, but I know that I do know that they eat bugs as well as, seeds. So vegetarian fed is better, but again, we want to stack these things, and at least vegetarian fed, especially if it's organically vegetarian fed, is a little bit better. All right, so what does organic mean for chickens and poultry? It means there's no pesticides were used in growing the feed. There was no antibiotics used, no hormones. They did have outdoor access. Doesn't mean they went outdoors. There was no irradiation, so killing things that were on them. No animal byproducts were given to them. So a lot of times they'll just chop up whatever they, have from the butcher yard and just feed to the chickens. So that's not very good. And their feed was actually organic. So that's a good thing. That's the next step up, right? All right, pastured or pasture raised is the next thing up. So that means that the chickens were allowed to be in the field. It's very, very likely that those farms do not use antibiotics or hormones because they're eating what they're supposed to eat, which is whatever's around, whatever they can catch and find. And they're allowed to eat whatever they like. So if they're not jammed in those deplorable conditions, then generally they're healthier. Just imagine if you had to be, if you had to live in a gym with 400 other people, all right, that would not be a sanitary condition. But these guys are allowed to move around a bit. So pastured or pasture raised is way better. So before we get to regenerative farming, that'll almost be wrapping it up for today. Again, stacking these things, pasture raised and organic, is good. Another thing to think about is, you know, if you get your beef and chicken from a CSA or somebody local, I'll talk about eggs down along the line, but I have a friend that raises her own chickens, and we get the eggs from her chickens. I know they're happy chickens, and you know the color of the eggs are amazing, and I know she loves her chickens. That's kind of funny to hear, but I know they're well taken care of. So even though she doesn't have pasture raised and organic and whatever, if you get to know the farmer that has the chickens or the beef cattle, then they can tell you what they do. And that's why when I see people at a farmer's market, I always ask them about how they raise their animals. All right, so moving on from those two things to regenerative farming, and talk about a few of those other things. So regenerative farming is it's actually an ancient type of farming that is ecosystem based, that farmers used to use a long time ago, because they had to. They didn't have all these things. All right. The first thing that they do is keep the soil covered, so there's always a cover crop on it. They minimize soil disturbance, so they generally do not till the ground before they plant. They maximize the crop diversity, so they have many different crops growing on the same field. They integrate livestock, because think about it, 300 years ago, when there was bison roaming all around, it was a lush ecosystem. The bison were gone to the bathroom, number one, and number two, on the fields, it was providing fertilizer. It was being reabsorbed by the plants and used, and it was a circle. That's what happened. The other thing with regenerative farming is that the purpose of a cover crop is to have roots holding the soil in there, and not so it blows away. I'm sure you've seen in the news lately some dust storms that are totally enveloping cities. One of the reasons why is a lot of our farmland is just smashed and flattened. You can go drive through Pennsylvania, you can see fields that have nothing on them and they're just dirt. All right, it's not regenerative farming. Probably spray Roundup all over those things. The other things that they do is worried about the soil health. There are thousands, probably billions of bacteria that work synergistically with plants, and they pass along information to keep each other healthy. The plants, provides, stability and a place for those things to live, and even some food sometimes. And then all those microbes, are constantly breaking down things to get to the plant. When we spray everything with Roundup, that kills everything, even the microbiome. So if you think about it, if we're stripping the land and having all these pesticides kill everything, what kind of nutrients are there for those plants to absorb? There isn't any. That's why our food is so nutrient deficient now. So regenerative farming also avoids chemicals. They don't have GMOs. One of the requirements is that animals exhibit their normal behavior. Can't even believe that somebody had to write that down, for regenerative organic certified farming. Animals should act like animals. So, which means that those animals in a feedlot are not acting like themselves, right? Farm workers are paid a fair wage. There's good working conditions. This is not new. This is something that's been around for forever. And it's just been in the last, since basically the 1940s, where we really changed agriculture for the bad. All right. I'll get to the questions in a second. But why are these choices important? All right. So mainly for your health and to nourish, all right? If cattle and meat is filled with pesticides and fat, fat stores, um, heavy metals and inflammation, and you eat that fat where you're getting that inflammation and those heavy metals and pesticides from the meat that you're eating. So you are what you eat is, totally true. If you eat conventional meat with, pesticides, antibiotics, and hormones in it, that's going to be incorporated into you, and you're going to have to detoxify that. What are the environmental benefits? Well, in a conventional feedlot, there's so much manure that's just laying around. They have to remove it and take it somewhere. And a lot of times, when they don't take it somewhere, it just runs into the ecosystem, and we have those extra feces in the, in our ecosystem and our water supply. In regenerative farming, since the cattle move around a lot, and there's it's full of plants, then that feces is not super concentrated. It's spread out over the whole pasture, and then the plants can absorb those that excrement, and it feeds the microbiome in the soil, and it nourishes the plant, and then the cow has a more nourishing plant when they eat it. There's a lot of evidence that this is going to help. Regenerative farming is going to help global climate change. If you're concerned about that, it's an awesome reason to vote with your dollar every time you purchase something. There's a lot more we can talk about, but we're getting a little bit long here. All right, so that is the end of our presentation for this week. So next week, we're going to stay with Primal Blueprint Law number 1, eat lots of plants and animals, but we'll talk a little bit about labeling fruits and vegetables and why that matters. So hopefully you have a clear picture of today of what labeling and some reasons are to choose better nourishment for yourself. Thanks for coming today. We'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you so much for being here.